Yo, fam, what up? This is a first edition. This is going to be a series that I'm doing on the 14 traits, actually in a ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholic and Dysfunction. And we're going to talk about things like codependency, the instinct to control, just some of the more insidious parts of family that a lot of you have had questions about, and I'm just generally interested in. So I'm going to actually do a podcast. I'm going to start recording here in a second. But yeah, I'm just playing around, just seeing what's popping, what's happening, what I can make work and not work. But I'm excited for it. Anyway, let me get this other John started, and I'm gonna roll through the first part of the traits. Boom. All right, so here's the thing I want to talk to you about. And when I first got sober, I started in one fellowship. My wife is in a different fellowship for families called Al-Anon. I actually started in Narcotics Anonymous, transitioned into Alcoholics Anonymous, and now what I've been doing most of is Adult Children of Alcoholic and Dysfunction. And although not everything is totally identifiable, but there's a lot. There's a lot of things that, through all the ways of working the steps, through all the years of being in meetings and helping people, I always felt there was something missing. And a lot of times when I talk to families or other people about relationship stuff and parenting and even the stuff that I'm going through, I tend to gravitate towards some of the same stuff. So here we go. Chapter 1. It's called The Laundry List of the Problem. And talking about the adult child means that we respond to adult interactions with fear and self-doubt that we learned in childhood. And I've always thought that was funny and kind of silly, that I was childish and selfish and never wanted to grow up. But that hit me a little bit between the eyes. It said this undercurrent of hidden fear can sabotage our choices and relationships. We can appear outwardly confident while living with a constant question of self-worth. And that's one thing that I really identified with, is for all these years of thinking that I was this super confident, outgoing dude, realizing as I've gotten older that it was just an act. It wasn't an act as if I was being fake. It was a subconscious survival skill that I learned. But always having an outward feeling of self-confidence, but that undercurrent of low self-worth, insecurity, not sure, not good enough, smart enough, etc. Many of us have had successful careers, but we still felt disconnected from life. Some of us experience regular failure. So there's those people that fail all the time and embrace the failure, that maybe relish the failure. And there's some people that overcompensate that insecurity with like extreme success, but yet both have this underlying desire or insecurity and low self-worth. We lived with a self-created calamity mixed with self-harm and self-hate. Many of us had been in the middle of success and failure. We wondered why others appeared to be enjoying life while we guessed what was normal. We felt like we were on the outside looking in, and I tell you, that's I'm not saying that everybody has some variation of this. Part of the things that I talk about when I teach or on the podcast is, what I'm trying to do is find the through line between those that have the obvious struggle and challenge, which is like drug addiction, alcoholism, addictive behavior. Those are very, very obvious things. I always say it's like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The diagnosis is easy. What I'm trying to draw the through line with this conversation is, how does the family contribute? In other words, the codependency, the control, the manipulation, the people that us as alcoholics and drug addicts attract these people in to take care of, or for us to support this like insidious yin and yang that comes with that. It says adult children who are codependents, drug addicts, food addicts, gamblers, sex addicts, workaholics relate equally to the personality traits on the laundry list. It's not uncommon for an adult child to be acting out in one or more addictions or compulsions at the same time. This addictiveness is our nature as adult children. And so that's another thing that happens with a lot of adult children or people that either were raised in a dysfunctional type family or perpetuate that in their own families, is even if someone gets sober, oftentimes we will substitute other behaviors, whether it's being a workaholic, food, risky behavior, everything but the cheat, everything but the using. If a lot of times people that are still using drugs and alcohol will substitute substances. In other words, we'll have like our drug of choice, the one that's causing all the problems. So we tell our family and ourselves, yo, we're going to quit this hard stuff and we're going to substitute it for something else. But yet we still feel that undercurrent of self-hate, insecurity, not good enough. And we use substances to numb, almost learning how to just exist instead of thrive, feeling happy, joyous, and free. It goes on to talk about some of these families include parents who were emotionally ill, hypochondriacs, hypercritical, perfectionistic, ultra-religious, or sexually abusive. And this is one thing, and I'm going to do part of this series, is there's 5 types of families that don't have alcohol and drug present in the home, and maybe even their grandparents, their parents didn't have any drug or alcohol present, but yet the behavior of dysfunction is perpetuated from generation to generation, some of which are people that have emotionally ill parents, people that suffer from mental health in the home, hypochondriacs, people that are always think something's wrong, waiting for the shoe to drop and looking to pop over-the-counter pills or other prescriptions, hypercritical, ultra-religious, militaristic type households that are really, really strict and critical. Those are, they identify so well in some of these groups. Many members say the laundry list is a powerful piece of literature that raised the veil of denial they had lived under as adults. In other words, oftentimes it's so easy for us to hang around with other people that think, act, feel, and behave just like we do. Therefore, when we go to the well and we ask our friends and family, what do you think about this? They usually agree with us because they're acting the same way. We don't normally hang around with people that drink and use, that don't drink and use the way we do, that don't discipline the way we do, that don't perpetuate this veil of shame, guilt, abandonment, dysfunction, along with these other abusive, addictive behaviors. So anyway, what's the laundry list? So I'm going to read through what they are, and then maybe I'm going to go into something else. This is going to be part 1 of a series, but I'm just going to go through this real quick. The laundry list. It says, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. So we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. Number 2, we became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. I've struggled a lot with that. 3, we are frightened by angry people and any personal criticism. 4, we either become alcoholics, marry them, or both, or find another compulsive personality, such as a workaholic, to fulfill our sick abandonment needs. This was bonkers. When I look at just even my family, the people that we hang out with, everybody within our circles have some sort of wild person in their groups. But even down to the type of person that maybe had drug addiction or alcoholic in their home, and they said, I am never going to touch this stuff. I'm going to go a total different way. I'm going to be opposite of how I was raised. And they end up marrying someone that's either a workaholic, or in some variation of abandonment. Like, for example, my wife's father was gone all the time. So, that's just another example. Even though they may not be using in the household or doing any kind of crazy behavior, the fact that they're gone 3 to 6 months at a time could very easily fulfill this abandonment need that someone has created in childhood, that's perpetuating, even it doesn't look like their family. Let's see. We lived life from a viewpoint of victims, and we are attracted by that weakness in our love and our friendship relationships. This is pretty insidious. This is a fun one for me. 6. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look closely at our own faults. Boy, this is a good one, because as easy as it is to be, I would always roll my eyes at what I would consider being a victim, right? Don't complain. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't take care of business. Don't let anybody see you sweat. So what I would do is that I would take on this overdeveloped sense of responsibility. Like in my last job, I worked about 50 or 60 hours a week. I did it voluntarily. I was working 6 days a week, 9 to 10 at night, 10 to 11 at night, something like that. I did it to support the family, but yet I would constantly find myself getting upset when I was backed into a corner that my wife didn't appreciate all the sacrifice that I was giving to the family. So on one hand, I was taking the responsibility of the family on my shoulder. I had an overdeveloped sense of responsibility that I need to take care of it. Nobody else is going to do it. I need to do it. But yet I equally look for affirmation, and I feel like a victim when you don't recognize how great I'm doing or how much of a sacrifice I'm making. Number 7, we get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. 8, we become addicted to excitement. Now this is interesting, because when they were writing this trait, they originally wrote, we became addicted to fear. And what I identify a lot more with that, but addicted to fear means I'm always worried about the other shoe dropping. I'm always worried about, I've got a knot in the pit of my stomach, and I'm worried about getting found out. I'm worried about someone criticizing me or doing something wrong. Even when good things are happening, I go, hey, this isn't going to last very long. I'm waiting for everything to come piling down. Oftentimes people will say things like, oh, I have terrible luck. Oh, nothing ever good happens to me. But it's that insidious knot in the gut, as if something's always going to go wrong. And on the flip side, addicted to excitement. I'm addicted to breaking the rules, kicking up against the line. Whatever that line is, I want to get as close as I possibly can. I want to break the law. I want to do something that, having a risk of someone finding out. And it's just this, it just instinctually creates this, they call it being addicted to the inner drugstore, the inner hormones and feelings that go along with exciting or risky behavior, or being scared all the damn time. The other thing, we confuse love and pity, and tend to love people we can pity and rescue. And that's where you get these Al-Anon type codependent behaviors. We're always looking for people that are struggling. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility that we need to donate, we need to volunteer, take pity on people, and we confuse like, oh man, this is a really loving relationship, when really it's just kind of a sick codependent relationship. Number 10, we have stuffed our feelings from our traumatic childhood and lost the ability to feel or express our feelings because it hurts so much. And in parentheses, it says denial. And I think what's interesting about this is I don't love the idea of traumatic childhood. In my mind, it's hard for me to, sure, there's trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, but in my mind, I didn't have a majorly traumatic childhood. I didn't get the sense beat out of me. I wasn't any kind of sexually molestation or any kind of abandonment or some of the horror stories that you hear of being neglected. But I do identify with stuffing my feelings, having a hard time, particularly as an adult, having a hard time identifying how do I actually feel, particularly in the moment. And then once I identify it, to be able to share it. It was such a struggle. That's actually one of the reasons that led me to work in the 12 steps in ACA is I figured that I wasn't able to get deep enough. I knew there was some stuff from my past that I couldn't put a finger on, but I felt like there was something deeper that I could get to that I couldn't necessarily put my finger on. And this allows me to address some of these things. But that was a symptom. I wasn't able to feel my feelings to a certain level. I was able to go down to a certain point, depth-wise, and then I wasn't able to express them, which was causing problems in my marriage and my relationships. Number 11, we judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. This is really a good one because many people talk about beating themselves up with a 2x4, right? For me, I've always been very complimentary of everyone else, but anytime someone wants to give me a compliment, I've gotten much better, but I have a hard time taking it. I usually do say some sort of self-deprecating way about, deflecting it. I also talk a lot of smack to myself. I wouldn't dare say that you're a loser, you're no good, you're never going to make it, you're clueless. I would never tell you that, but I tell that to me all the damn time. Have a low sense of self and self-esteem. That's been pretty insidious for me because, like I said earlier, I've been able to, in a lot of ways, I am confident in a lot of areas, but I've figured out a lot of ways to dress that stuff up and hide the low self-esteem. Number 12, we are dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings, which we receive from living with sick people who were never there emotionally for us. That's a funny one. I'll get into that in a bit. 13, alcoholism is a family disease. We become para-alcoholics or codependents and took on the characteristics of that disease even though we did not pick up a drink. There's a joke in Al-Anon that says, who's crazier, the alcoholic or drug addict who act crazy and act the fool and have all these defects of character under the influence of drug and alcohol, or the Al-Anon, the codependent, the ACA, who has all that same behavior, all those same character defects, but don't actually have an alcohol or drugs substance to blame it on. 14, para-alcoholics. Para-alcoholics are codependents or reactors rather than actors. That's something that I struggle quite a bit with at home and with my son and with my wife, and that's been a big one. But those are the 14 traits. I'm going to read some of this stuff, some of the stuff I have underlined, and then I don't know how many parts of this series is going to be, but we'll go on. These says adult children codependence. These 14 traits describe a personality who cannot truly love another person or truly allow a higher power to work in his or her life. We have great difficulty accepting love as well. Our parents shamed us or belittled us for being vulnerable children. In their own confusion, they called it love. They passed on what was done to them, thinking they were being caring parents. What many adult children describe as love or intimacy before reaching ACA was actually codependence or rigid control. And I wouldn't say that my parents were, they definitely weren't overly shaming or belittling, but there's something in there. There's something in there that I definitely identify. Maybe we can work it out. This was one thing that one of my mom's favorite lines was, "You better quit that crying before I give you something to cry about." And that's kind of my thought of, what a way to stuff my feelings. I was feeling emotional, out of control. I was, very well could have been being selfish or, whatever, but, quit that crying before I give you something to cry about was like this ultimate swallowing of whatever feeling or emotion I was going through. I better get rid of that or else. Spare the rod, spoil the child, love us, and didn't want to spoil. Yeah, whatever. These are just some notes that I made. Next paragraph, and I'm not reading everything. These are just paraphrasing. It says, there are many definitions for codependence. However, the general census is that codependent people tend to focus on the wants and needs of others rather than their own. By doing so, the codependent or adult child can avoid his or her own feelings of low self-worth. And that's for dang sure. I mean, one of the, it would be very easy for me to point out to my wife or the people around me that say that they are codependent. I 100% suffer from codependence. It just looks different. But I'll tell you one thing, is that anytime you are, here's a bit of a contradiction or a paradox. In AA, we talk about getting to a place of constant thought of others. We have this overwhelming self-centeredness. We have an overwhelming, let's just call it self-obsession, self-centeredness, egomaniacs with inferiority complexes. It's like a paradox. And so one way to get out of ourselves is to focus on others. However, you can also, that focus on others can also be codependent behavior, because we start ignoring, we put them at their priorities at the top, our priorities and wants, needs, and desires at the bottom, and then we, in a sense, snuff out what it is that's good for us. And if you are in a habit or in these dysfunctional relationships, you lose sight of who you are. And it looks good. It looks good from the perspective of being of service, being nice, kind, taking on extra responsibilities. But when you are ignoring what it is that you want, desire, and God forbid you start getting sick, tired, beat down, depressed, and struggle with mental health issues, that's also a byproduct of putting everybody's needs above yourself. The other thing, which is quite insidious, is manipulation and control. Thinking that if my wife would just say this way, behave this way, not do this, if my son would just act right, I would feel better. That's one of the biggest pitfalls in any relationship, but particularly in recovery, is that if I need you to do something to make me feel better, I would say that that's cause for question. Not drawing healthy boundaries. That's not what I'm talking about. But when I find myself thinking that everybody else needs to change so I can feel better, that is a lack of responsibility, and that's focusing on things that I have absolutely no control over. Let's see. Another paragraph. In ACA, we realized we could not have reacted another way given our dysfunctional upbringing, which means this is kind of, if we were raised in a more dysfunctional household, we have no other way to know of how to react. We mistakenly thought we had caused their mood or attitude or could do something to change the circumstances. How many times did your parent, growing up, your parents were mad and upset and you thought it was your fault? You didn't know why they were mad and upset, but whatever happened, you thought it was your fault, and you thought, man, if I was just a better kid, if I wouldn't have done that thing, my parents would be much happier. What about in your marriage or in your relationship? Your wife or husband does a deep sigh, or you could tell that they're grumpy, or they got that look on their face, and you think you did something wrong, or you want to take on whatever's going on with that person to make everything nice. thinking that their mood has somehow either has something to do with you or their mood makes you uncomfortable and now you need to fix it. As children, we took responsibility for our parents' rage, anger, blame, and pitifulness. We were children, but we unknowingly took responsibility for our parents' feelings and poor behavior. This mistaken perception, born in childhood, is the root of our codependent behavior as adults. By living with a blaming or shaming parent, we developed a dependent false self. Our false self constantly seeks outward affection, recognition, or praise, but we secretly believe we don't deserve it. Meanwhile, our inner child is driven inward into hiding. The false self is the adult child personality expressed in the 14 traits of the laundry list. Now, I always want to be careful when I'm talking about my parents because, number one, I don't want them to be offended. Number two, I don't want to paint the picture that somehow I had this tough childhood. I was lucky. My parents were married until my dad passed away. My mother was poor. Raised in a Church of Christ children's home because her mother and grandmother were struggling with major mental health issues. My father had a sick mother at home. She had polio. She was paralyzed. My grandfather was a workaholic. I would say he's a heavy drinker as well. But they both had their own childhood. My grandfather on my father's side, his parents committed suicide, so he was raised by his grandparents. And so, we think of and I've talked to my mom quite a bit about this, but, who did my mom have as a good example for parenting? She was raised in foster care at a children's home. Strict religious background. She was raised by nuns, basically. I mean, who taught her how to be a mother and to show compassion and love and a functional, well-balanced, loving household? Because on one hand, I think quite fondly on my childhood. My parents loved us over and beyond. My mom was very loving, but she was also very strict. So I want to be very careful, and I also don't want you to be in the habit of explaining away why you are the way you are and blaming your parents. It's one thing to be raised in a true, traumatic, abusive, whether it's physically, verbally, abandonment type household. That's one thing. But it's another thing being raised in a house where the parents are doing the best they can. They were just doing what they were taught. Their grandparents were doing what they were taught, and some of it is off. So I want to be real careful. When you're talking to parents, or when parents see this, that we don't put too much, blaming responsibility on them. Overdeveloped sense of responsibility. They were, many adult children arrive at their adult years with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, which they communicate as love or nurturing care. This behavior is a disguise to get the love we never received as children. I don't know about the love we never received as children because that's not true for me, but I have had at the root a sense of responsibility, taking care of myself. It's up to me. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. But it is, and in a lot of ways, I've dressed that up as being responsible from, being out of the house at 18, 19 years old, paying my way, working, always having a job, always paying my way. But in a lot of ways, what this is talking about is, although yes, it is responsible, and although yes, it is a good thing, it's cause to look at what is the root? Am I doing it in some insidious, codependent way to get attention and to get people to? Am I seeking affirmation because I think that's going to make me feel whole, and then not even be able to accept that affirmation whenever I do get compliments? Let's see what else we got here. This is going to be the end of the chapter, and maybe I'll do another bit after this. But the very last paragraph in this bit is, while these characteristics stunted our emotional and spiritual lives, we must realize they protected us as children. We grip these common behaviors tightly as adults. They are not easily surrendered, even though they create the internal pain and isolation that has driven us to ACA. We urge you to be gentle with yourself as you begin to address the most troublesome traits. There is another way to live. I'm going to wrap it up there. But anyway, if you find any value with this, what I mean by that is if you identify with any of this, I'm going to actually go into these traits in detail in the later series. But if you actually identify with and you find this interesting and want to have a conversation, holler at your boy. I'd love to be able to talk with you about this. Boom. Love you.